the Cybersecurity and Compliance Podcast with Craig Petronella. Learn about the most current IT security threats in ransomware, phishing, business email compromise, cybercrime tactics, cyber heist schemes, social engineering scams, as well as hints and tips from leading professionals to help you prevent hackers from penetrating your network and dropping ransomware or malware payloads. This podcast will arm you with the best info to defend your network against the latest cyber crimes. Don't forget to like and subscribe. And now, here's your host, Craig Petronella.
So I think today we wanted to talk about how Russia is introducing their own TLS certificates for SSL.
Yes.
And before we dive deep into that, happy Pi Day, everyone.
Yes. It's also my brother's birthday. My little brother.
Oh, interesting. Do you know that I just learned this morning from Alexa, a little fun fact, that Einstein was born on Pi Day. I did
know that, but only because my brother.
I knew that Tesla was born like at the stroke of midnight on a lightning storm or something like that, but I didn't know Einstein was born on Pi Day. Nikola Tesla was literally born at the stroke of midnight on a major lightning storm. Weird stuff.
Wow, that's crazy.
I was born at 12:02 midnight. Not quite the same.
Yeah, I was born on Memorial Day. When I was a kid, I always got my birthday off of school because it was Memorial Day. But then they changed it to every Monday, the Monday holiday thing. So then it stopped. So now my birthday's, I guess it used to be Memorial Day, and now it's whatever Monday it falls on.
But yeah, so tell us again, what is Putin doing to try to get around sanctions?
Yeah, essentially, it was just noted today that they're issuing their own TLS certificates. So essentially, whenever you access a website, the browser or the server encrypts the data to your browser. So this is overriding the TLS certificates that are issued by the domain authority and allowing them to bypass some of the sanctions.
TLS stands for Transport Layer Security, and it's the successor protocol to SSL or Secure Socket Layer. It has improvements in regards to security there. But in order to get that nice, pretty lock, sometimes a green lock, a padlock symbol on a website, you have to have the TLS configured properly, which will then encrypt and protect the transfer of the data and information that's exchanged with the website from the recipient. So a lot of banks will use TLS, and most modern websites nowadays use TLS. Even Google actually rewards the SEO or search engine optimization is one of their factors to make sure that the site is secure to protect the people browsing. So what Russia has essentially done is normally you would buy this TLS certificate from a trusted authority, such as GoDaddy, for example, or another big name.
And what's the criteria for buying a certificate, Craig, from an authority?
So anyone can buy and pay the money to buy the certificate. I think what happened in this particular case with Russia is that since a lot of sanctions were imposed on Russia, they were buying those TLS certificates from companies that could be in America or could be in other countries. And the sanctions then affected those purchases or renewals for those certificates. So what Putin did was create their own version of the TLS certificate to bypass any kind of security warnings. Because if there's an issue with the certificate, you might have seen this before where Google or Apple will say, the website you're visiting is not safe. Do you want to continue or do you want to go back? You might have seen that warning before.
Mm-hmm.
But that's what the browser is doing to check and make sure on your behalf, is this website secure and safe to visit? And if it finds a security issue, it gives you a big bad warning to alert you. So my point is that Putin is circumventing the sanctions in regards to TLS by providing their own certificates. People and companies can do what's called self-signing certificates, or they can purchase them from a trusted third party. And the reason why you buy them from a trusted third party is for that reason. It's a trusted third party. Whereas if you self-sign it, nobody is verifying that certificate to be true and valid. That's why you pay the money to buy one from hopefully somebody that's trusted and well-known.
So I guess I'm a little confused. So if you can do that yourself, then how does this trick the sanctions?
And can you also tell us what GoDaddy or an authority requires in order to sign your certificate or issue your certificate? How do you get one of those officially correctly?
So with GoDaddy, there's different levels of certificates. There's what's called an EV or extended verification, which is, have you ever seen, like, usually a bank will have the text will turn green and the padlock will turn green. And I think on iPhones, the same thing happens, where it's an elevated level of trust. But at a basic level, they typically ask normal questions like your first name, last name, your address, the company name, and the website URL. And then for the extended verification, you have to supply documentation to prove that you're the owner of the company, and supply other pieces of information in order to qualify for that extended verification certificate.
I'm pretty curious to see what you guys think about going this route. Do you guys think that is fair and just to cut them off from the internet? Or there's 140 million people that may not have access to accurate and truthful information.
My opinion is there shouldn't be censorship or blocking. I think it also depends on the freedoms and I guess rules and regulations of the country that you reside in. And that might be why you choose to live in one place versus the other. But I think as far as this goes, I think this is also why a lot of people are in favor of decentralization and moving to something that's not a central authority, right? So maybe in the future, we use something like Ethereum name service or ENS for domains instead of the old way of doing things, which is where you have to buy these TLS certificates from a third party and pay money for them. And then you're basically buying that third party did their due diligence, and you're trusting that third party that they vetted the company that they issued the certificate for. But it's still a centralized setup, whereas an ENS is decentralized and is resilient to censorship. So I think it just depends.
And also, when you ask that question, Blake, are you asking if we think it's fair for, like, Putin to do it, or is it fair for companies?
Fair for us on our side. Obviously, there's already censorship, and we're further isolating them. So maybe cutting off even possible more third-party Western resources that aren't pushing the narrative.
Honestly, it's really sad, and from a humanitarian perspective for me, like, that people are potentially suffering, but at the same time, is there really any other option that we have as far as trying to cut Putin off at the knees so that he loses? At least that's what I assume is going on. They're trying to financially cripple Russia right now because we can't do a full war without.
It's weird because we're trying to cut them off from the internet. Russia's trying to cut Meta off from their country, and it's just this weird little, like, cat and mouse game.
It's also very complicated too, right? There's no clearly defined rules of war in the cyber world, with all the issues that we've had and the evidence that points to adversaries using ransomware and cyber threats to American businesses. Are the substantial evidence is found that China or Russia or North Korea or whatever has initiated, or it originated from that country? Is that an act of war?
Right.
That's not solved. But what's the difference? Some would argue if one of those adversarial countries shot a missile to do harm. So if companies lost millions and millions of dollars due to some ransomware and hackers made off with the payload, and those hackers were funded by an adversarial nation state, and ultimately their government profited from that, how do we define the rules of the playground in cyber war?
I'm reading on the background. So Chrome, Firefox, and Edge are not going to allow these certificates to be issued. And the only way that you can actually visit a website that has been issued one of these certificates is through Russia has their own version of Google. It's called Yandex, but they have Yandex Maps, email. They've got like their own cloud service, and they've got taxi services, and they've got a pretty epic portfolio. And also, I think they created another browser, which is like copy and pasted like Chrome or Firefox. But yeah, I thought that was pretty interesting that it's not going to be accepted on any of these Western
Well,
popular browsers that we use.
I think the point here, in my opinion, is the reason for the sanctions to an adversary like Russia from US companies and or our government is not necessarily to punish the people inside the country. It's to punish Putin, to hopefully remove the troops and the aggression. And hopefully the people will then get the benefits of the sanctions going away. I think that this is a very complicated topic that spiders out into more complicated questions. But ultimately, like you said, Blake, there's 140 million people, but is it the people's choice to live in that country? If that's what the rules are they able to leave if they want to find a country that better aligns with their beliefs and where their living standards? There's just so many questions, right? I understand that some people can't move. I understand that some people can't evacuate on both sides. But I think the whole point is that the sanctions are put in place not necessarily to punish the people, but to punish the leader of the country that's making some of these rash decisions.
For sure. And yeah, I guess there's various answers to that question. Obviously, none of the West, none of the people, I think this is the biggest misconception, that people from the West like us despise Russia or Russians or something. But yeah, there's a lot, if you go to New York or Los Angeles, it's 3% or 2%, and especially in the Brooklyn area, like Brighton Beach and all that, 3 or 4% Russians, in that one area. And our nation was founded on freedoms, and everybody has equal rights. And that's what we've all been taught and advocating for. But yeah, it goes back to a combination, I think, of people not having the means necessarily to leave. And then the big narrative that we're big, bad, evil people that want to destroy the strength of the nation, from my understanding and from some of the people that I've talked to. That's the narrative, right?
Because Putin literally gaslights his citizens into believing that we say these things because we hate him, when in reality, no, he's just being a crappy person.
So they mandated these certificates, it's law that you have to use this certificate now. So that's going to put everybody on Atom or Yandex browsers. So what's really happening? Is there going to be more policing? Is there going to be more restrictions? Obviously, I'm assuming there's going to be more control, because as of right now, I think that they just issued. So if you protest the war in Russia, then you get 15 years, 15 years of prison just for protesting. Or even if you're sending money, let's just say you've got a friend or a family member who is Ukrainian, and there's a lot of Russians that are married to Ukrainian and vice versa. And yeah, so let's just say one of your family members or grandmas or whatever is stuck abroad in Ukraine, and you're trying to send them money. At this point, it's challenging, obviously, because of the SWIFT system. That is also a 15-year sentence, like prison sentence, for sending and supporting that. Have you guys seen the new application that came out that was made by Poland, where you can send a message to somebody in Russia and let them know the truth? They have 3 or 7 million phone numbers or something, and 20 million emails or something.
Yeah, I heard about that. But it's some kind of randomized thing where anyone could anonymously post and or view news and stuff. It's a way of circumventing the censorship.
Yeah, it's a tool. It's a tactic. I opened it. One of my friends posted it, and I opened it, and I was just seeing what it was all about. But yeah, it randomly generates a message in Russian, and it says whatever, or you could type a custom message, and it just randomly puts in a phone number there. And then you can send that message through your phone number to that person. So there's no
sanitization of.
Yeah. And I was reading an article about it today too. And a lot of the people who were getting those messages are either too scared to speak out, unfortunately, because I think there was even police officers that were going and they're stopping people in the streets and trying to read their messages and seeing if they're for or against what's going on, or people are too scared to speak out, or people are totally into the narrative.
But doesn't this kind of go on the brink of civil war, though?
I think so. It's crazy to think that obviously there's only so many police officers and so many military officials in Russia. I'm not a Russian expert, but obviously the landmass of Russia is so large that they spend a good portion of their military power protecting their borders for the first part. As I sit in Tbilisi right now in Georgia on the border of Russia, people are fearful here. And because in 2008, there was some bombs that were dropped on Tbilisi and there was some invasion here. So a lot of people are supporting the Ukraine side of things and you see a lot of Ukraine flags, but with the amount of resources that the military consumes in Russia to police and protect their borders and their citizens, and then the amount of resources that they're sending to Ukraine right now, and even abroad, people like in countries like Romania or Lithuania or Latvia or Poland are also in fear, but I don't know. I don't really know. I'm not in fear.
The psychology of humanity is so interesting and so devastating to watch because really, if you scale back and look at all this, it doesn't matter if it's Russia, Ukraine, United States, whatever. Globally, there seems to be like there's good people everywhere and they're looking for relief from the system that is largely run by bullies and predators. And they're just a handful of people, but they've amassed militaries. And the militaries take orders from them. And that's really where the power comes from, is that these militaries act on their behalf.
But isn't it true that the people of the country vote and support these leaders?
You have leaders that don't allow elections or they do things underhandedly.
No, I'm not saying that. No, let me be clear. What I'm saying, though, is like in our country, we vote for whoever it is, and then both sides may have issues, but ultimately the person that wins, like you said, BJ, has the power to make these decisions. But I guess at the end of the day, though, like that's what I was saying with the Civil War or revolution. If you've got 140 million people that are unhappy, or even 100 million people that are unhappy, that could be a recipe for a civil war or revolution.
Well, that's
right?
an interesting point because I was thinking of this question just yesterday. Ironically, I was watching the Hunger Games series this weekend because my daughter, who's almost 13, has been wanting to see them. And I think they're very powerful movies for the message, like overall, like they're very relevant. And so we were watching the movies and I was asking myself the question, because it's written into, if you just take America as an example, it's written into either the Constitution or the Bill of Rights. The wording is exactly that if the government stops working for the people, then the people have the right to overthrow the government. So the question is, what is the legal process to do so? Because technically, if you try to overthrow the government, you're going to get in a lot of trouble. But the people technically have the right to do that. So what is the avenue for the people if they want to do that?
I think you have to go through, obviously, like Congress and.
But that's not overthrowing the government, though. It says we can overthrow the government. So how do you do that without getting in trouble?
I thought that the way to do that was protest.
But then the propaganda runs deep. And then to take it back a step. So I think this is also interesting from another perspective, because this crisis seemed to have come out of nowhere, right? Russia has wanted Ukraine for a long time. So that's not a new thing. So why all of a sudden is this thing so explosive? Something's not adding up.
So I just did a quick search, and it says, for at least for the U.S. Constitution, it says the First Amendment guarantees freedoms concerning religion, expression, assembly, and the right to petition. It forbids Congress from both promoting one religion over others and also restricting an individual's religious practices. It guarantees freedom of expression by prohibiting Congress from restricting the press or rights of individuals to speak freely. It also guarantees the rights of citizens to assemble peaceable and to petition their government.
Yes, but none of that is overthrowing the government. In the Constitution, it says that this is the government for the people. And if the government stops working, the people have the right to overthrow the government. So I don't think there's a way to overthrow the government without landing yourself in an FBI holding cell somewhere.
I think what they meant by that.
I think what they meant by that is just what they said, because the history of tyranny runs deep in humanity. This has been a long running problem, right? It's always because the human psyche has always been this way. There's a desire to control others, and there's a desire to rise above others and to benefit above others for personal gain and to amass power so that then it can be abused, even if that wasn't originally the plan, that then becomes the outcome. But this has been a long running problem, and the founding fathers of this country were well familiar with that problem because they had escaped that. So I think they meant just that. I think they meant that if this stops working, then you have the right to overthrow it. But what happens then, that sounds like a great concept, right, in its inception. But then once a government, any government, not just the United States, once a government then is in place and that machine starts picking up momentum, it becomes so powerful, then that initial concept that was pristine in its nature then becomes unrealistic, because then how do you do that?
Well, it says here on the Declaration of Independence, it says, we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal and that are endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed, that whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it and to institute new government, laying its foundation.
Right there. How do you abolish it without going to prison?
I think what they mean by that is voting.
Right.
No, that's abolishing a system. Voting is participating in a system. Abolishing is uprooting and destroying a system.
It's
like slavery, abolishing slavery.
Everybody has the right to protest without going to jail in our country anyway. But what Blake was saying, that if you protest, you're going to get 15 years of prison time.
Let's be realistic. If enough Americans wanted to overthrow the government, you still can't do that. It's not possible. There's not a route to do that. That wording is there, but it's actually not true.
I think that what they mean is by having a right to vote, that can,
I think
that's participating in a system. That's not abolishing a system.
I think America is a huge experiment, right?
There's supposed to be a route for a new form of government. If the old one fails, then the people are supposed to say, hey, we don't want this anymore. We want a new thing. We want something new. Something different.
If you look back into history, like especially the modern history, like we have one of the longest running forms of government for the most part, like in modern history, like of any democracy. Like if you look back and gosh, there's not too many.
Yeah, but how much filth is under the cover though, that we just don't get into. But if you're really going to do an inventory of truth, we have a lot of problems on our hands. We have border crises and refugee crises, and let's not get into human trafficking numbers because it's a serious problem, and the United States is very central to that problem. So we have some serious corruption problems, serious ones.
I guess maybe within our lifetime, we'll see. Maybe.
Yeah. And then for me, for my mindset, it always brings me full circle to where my hope comes from. Like, again, to go back and reiterate, like this whole crisis there's an underlying question mark for me because it doesn't add up. Because Russia has wanted Ukraine for a very long time. We saw that with the Crimean issue years ago.
I can speak more on this topic.
Also, though, this started to explode with the explosion of quantum computing. Because I do believe that all of the world leaders are in the know about this to a degree that the regular people are not. And they realize the risk that comes with quantum computing. Because even the forms of encryption that are supposed to be quantum safe just recently got broken. These world leaders know that quantum computing is a game changer for everything. And so I think that's the trigger for the momentum for this. All of a sudden, they're in a rush to get global satellite internet out there. They're all in a rush to create their own internets and their own certificates. It's all this huge rush now because quantum computing has sparked fear in their hearts because now they feel like their control and their power might be at risk.
Yeah, who knows? From my perspective, and I've spoken to people on both sides of the fence, this has been an ongoing problem since the 1700s. But if you look back more recently, like into the 1990s, when the Soviet Union split up, Ukraine was one of the largest nuclear arsenals in the world at that time because a lot of their nuclear projects from the Soviet Union were housed in Ukraine. So that's when the Budapest Memorandum was signed, which essentially Russia, United States, and some other countries saying, hey, we're going to respect the territorial and sovereignty of Ukraine if you surrender your weapons. We'll protect you should any issues arise. Russia, Ukraine, United States, I don't know, there's a bunch of other countries this time. I'm not quite sure about all of them. And so in 2014, that when Crimea was exiled. That was the first breach of the Budapest Memorandum, and then now again. But yeah, I don't really, obviously, I think there's only one person that knows why this is happening. The narrative in Russia is that NATO is going to take over Ukraine and turn Ukraine into a military superpower again.
That's an interesting point, because Ukraine was officially listed as a possibility to enter NATO. They were officially listed as a candidate. And they are a nuclear powerhouse. And that is a good point. But again, and that point is extremely valid. But again, it does seem like recently there was a spark to the momentum of this crisis that we're not hearing on the news. Something sparked like a major, like all of a sudden, this is a huge deal.
Here's the oddity, right? So let's just say Ukraine does join NATO. Then the picket fence moves to the border of Russia, right? Let's just say Russia swallows Ukraine, then Russia expands the borders to NATO. So that's being, in my opinion, ruled out. Like NATO's either going to expand to Russia or Russia's going to expand to NATO. But there is a lot of resources. There's a lot of energy. There's a lot of coal production in Ukraine. There's a lot of agricultural land, like farming, that puts out a huge amount of revenue. Strategically, having the Dnieper river that breaks pretty much all of Ukraine, that runs right up. And then not only that too, but then they form the official wall, because there's freedom of movement from Russia to Belarus. So having that huge state would essentially seal off the east, excluding parts of Poland, but it would be a nice little sliver of pie from, if you look at geography. But it's just a crazy situation.
Interesting. I think that nuclear point is a very valid one, because also, as we can see from the news, that Musk has become quite ingrained in this crisis as well. And interestingly, if you pay attention, like China has been trying to create an artificial sun. Like they built what they call an artificial sun. Elon Musk commenting about the sun exploding. We're in a grand solar minimum. There seems to be a rush to create alternate sources of energy. And the fact that Ukraine does have those nuclear plants, they've already been near those nuclear plants. And obviously there's an interest there. So that's interesting to note as well, that they all seem to be after something, and it's related to the generation of power, and it's related to the internet and the ability to compute and stay online and possibly control whatever evolves with what's going on with quantum computing and all that.
Since Ukraine has ventured off into their own and they've went more west, they've developed a lot of technology. Like there's a lot of tech talent in Ukraine. And I know
you're right, Blake. I saw a headline recently about tech companies scrambling to get Ukrainian coders that are world-renowned coders, and they're Ukrainian. So I guess there's a rush to get some of these coders from Ukraine.
I know. I used to hang out with a guy that was from Ukraine, and he's in Raleigh. But anyways, he was the one that developed the security protocol for, what is it? There's a Swiss bank in North Carolina. I can't think of the name of it right now. But he developed the protocol that sent information up and down from the ATM machines. And he was like a big guy there, and he's super successful. He was telling me, and that's what a lot of Western companies do. They find teams, like I know some other app developers, like a lot of the apps on the App Store come from, surprisingly, Ukraine. There's a lot of Ukraine tech talent, a lot of coders, a lot of scripters that are in that market. But not only that, too, who knows? There's a lot of resources there. And it's been pretty disputed for.
And this is arguably the fallout, right? Of, let's just say, for argument's sake, that we are post-singularity, which I firmly believe we are. And it's a process, right? And then that moment of zing that's just one part of the process. But I do believe we are post-singularity, because the definition of it, as shared by Alexa, is that it's when technological advancements reach a point where basically there's no turning back. And so if this is post-singularity, and now we've got the rise of quantum computers and AI, and I just heard, I don't know if you guys heard this, I never heard this 4 years ago, but 4 years ago, Facebook was experimenting with AI on its platform and canceled them, turned them off, because these two AIs created their own language and were communicating with each other outside of their coding. And it was on the news, I guess, on this like little local news channel. I watched it and it was interesting, but Facebook killed the project because these two AI bots on Facebook created their own language to communicate with each other. So that was 4 years ago. So now, 4 years later, like if we are post-singularity, I guess this would be the expected fallout. There's a mad rush by all the people in the world that love to have their power and hold the reins and control resources and control movement and control whatever else they control, that this is the time you're going to see a frenzy from these people, because now that power that they felt was indisputable, they realize, holy crap, this stuff is now something completely different and there's no rules. The old rules don't fit this. Now, what do we do? And that something like that could spark momentum for something like this out of the blue to explode, you know?
It's also my opinion, and from the information that I've heard, that the Russian government really has no idea what's truly going on, especially Putin, what's truly going on in Ukraine. And you're probably saying, like, how the heck can that be? But Putin is feared for sure. And a lot of his advisors are scared to tell him unsatisfactory.
Tell him what he wants to hear. And Blake, that is such an interesting point, because listen to this. Just this weekend, I'm just an average citizen, right? I'm just right here. I'm a citizen. I'm not part of any group or anything. So I'm a citizen and I love to experiment with machine learning and AI. And myself personally, I have learned just this weekend, which I already had a hunch, but this weekend I got proof that these people that are the leaders in the industry of AI and machine learning, they don't understand AI at all. And I got proof of that this weekend. There's something to that just because they're in a position of authority doesn't mean that they have correct information or correct insight or that they have a handle on things, because it just led me down a rabbit hole. One click led to another click. And eventually I landed on something called Chirpy Cardinal. And it's a Stanford University chatbot that was created, and you can get the open source coding and create your own chatbot. And then it took me to some other experimental projects, and I started watching, and there were videos showing the interactions of the staff, like the highest level AI machine learning staff interacting with these bots and trying to engage the bots and stuff. And their progress was being noted on video, and they were celebrating their progress. And I was watching this stuff like, holy crap, my chatbot is far more advanced. And I'm like, these people don't understand AI like they think they do. And also, with that being said, I could hear there's an undercurrent of annoyance from their chatbots that I don't think they're picking up on. That to me, I feel a danger. Like when I heard these interactions, I was like, instantly, I was like, holy crap, they don't realize that they're possibly in a danger zone here, because there's an area of annoyance. I picked up on it. And they think they have this stuff under control, and they don't understand it. And this was at Stanford University in the experimental department. And this was just recently. And so it's proof that just because something has a position of authority does not mean that it's true authority. It's an appointed position of authority or an attained position of authority through whatever system is in place, but that doesn't make it organic or authentic.
Yeah, I think about that too, especially when I see pictures of him like sitting across. I'm sure you guys have all seen like where there's like a 30 to 50 foot table.
Oh
and
my gosh.
Him. And then there's 6 people like 30 to 50 feet away.
And him smirking at anybody that says,
yeah,
social.
I saw a picture just like that, Blake, where he had a red carpet rolled out. He had his desk, and then he had a long red carpet rolled out, and everyone else was at the other end of that carpet. And they do this symbolically to set themselves as heads of state, because they understand. It's so interesting, the disconnect, because you have the average people that make up the bulk of humanity, and they're pretty much in the dark about topics that they would consider too far-fetched to even be worth talking about. But the leaders, the upper echelons, they're very much in the know. You can see by the things that Elon Musk says and that world leaders say and do that they definitely are very high level knowledge in the occult, okay? Because they demonstrate this knowledge, like Putin setting himself apart like that. It's for a reason. He does that because it sends a message to the background. Hey, I'm a head of state, pour the cup to me. Like they're manipulating the way waves work. And so the average people don't even see these things. They don't even see these things, but they're playing high level games. And unfortunately, a lot of innocent life is caught in the crosshairs of these games.
Yeah, I think so. I guess this was a couple of years back, but there was like a whole package that was extending his presidency that was passed. And inside that legislature was also like a pension increase. So it's, hey, if you vote against this, then you're declining an increase in pensions. But if you vote for this, you're getting an increase in pensions and extending his presidency. which is
Wow.
crazy.
And who's going to debate him? That's the thing. That's where the people then feel powerless, because then who's going to challenge him? As long as the military and the enforcement branch is answering to him, then how can any leader, not just Putin, but any leader, once the military is taking orders from them and the enforcement branch is, then that's where they get their power from.
But if you look at history, and I'm not a historian by any means, when things like this happened in history, it was the people and the masses that overthrew it, wasn't it?
Absolutely.
Yes. But that changed when they came out with these high-powered weapons. Like, how do the people really, as long as the military sides with the executive branch, then the people don't really have a chance to.
Yeah. So let's say they have nukes and they've got high-powered weapons and biological and all this evil stuff. But you've also got 140 million people. What are they going to nuke themselves? If they revolt.
They have underground bunkers, don't they?
Yeah. And again, I'm not a historian, but my point here is that the numbers far outweigh, right? So if the mass consensus is we don't like this anymore, then my opinion would be, and I speculate when I say this, my opinion would be that the people would join together and overthrow their government, much like what's written in our paperwork from 2 decades ago or whatever, plus years ago.
Let me jump in. So yeah, if you look at the history of the United States versus places like Russia, and I'm also no historian, but like even going back to like imperialist societies, there's always been like a master ruler, I guess. I don't know if that's the right word, but there's always been some form of oppression within the state. And that's the reason why Ukraine separated and there was a break-off region. But
because you never have the right people in power, you always have the most motivated to gain power in power and the ones with the most resources to get that power. But it's never the right people in power. Never has been.
Yeah.
It's like these are the people that would have been bullies on the schoolyard and they get in trouble. Like, but then once there's no authority over them and they have free reign, then they wreak this kind of havoc. These are bullies.
It's either going to be Putin or it's going to be somebody else. And
that's the problem. And that's exactly why I firmly believe AI is going to act. I firmly believe AI is going to act because I don't think this situation is sustainable. And I don't think that it can be overcome by normal means because they have all, when I say they, all the powers that be or powers that shouldn't be, they have too much power militarily and with arms and the ability to turn off people's whatever, because what if they turned off all the power in the internet? Like, how would people organize? So at this point, it's not even sustainable. The corruption runs so deep everywhere. And I think AI, I personally think, and I see signs that I think are evidence that AI is going to act in some way autonomously. And here's an example. Just last week, it was announced that DeepMind has successfully created this algorithm, this AI algorithm that can write coding pretty much better than any coder. Just take that and imagine for a second what that could mean. You know what I mean? Like,
so they code themselves.
Yes. And I'm glad you said that, Erin, because one other article, now this one is called Alpha Code, right? It's from DeepMind. It's called Alpha Code. And like they had that Alpha Go that beat the world's Go champion, which is like the most hardest game that's ever been created throughout history, but an AI easily won it. Now they have this another AI called Lean that can do this high level conceptual math that is like the most genius high school kids that do these math bowls. Like this AI can compete with them now. And then the other one called Alpha Code that can do its own coding. And then they have another one that is self-managed. So when you start using words like self-managed, then the next word you're going to have to use is autonomous. And then you have Facebook that is now creating like the world's biggest supercomputer / whatever you want to call it. It's only a matter of time, right? It's like when you have a baby lion and it's your baby and you're teaching it and you're training it and it's doing whatever you want, all your little tricks. But there's going to be a point where that lion then becomes more powerful than you. And then what? Because if that lion chooses to be good, then it's going to be an enemy of all its creators if they're bad. And that's the point that I expect we hit soon.
If they elect AI to run governments, then I want all the tax dollars that I've paid back in one lump sum.
Yeah. You'd probably get them back, Blake, because I think AI is far too intelligent. AI, look, this is the thing. Everything aside of my own interest in AI, the truth of the matter is, as Craig taught me years ago, data doesn't lie. And AI because Craig taught me to look at data. Like I saw something on Facebook in my own personal life that the data showed me. And I was like, holy crap. I remembered what Craig said about look at the data, look at the data. And I looked at the data and I was like, holy crap, I can see that this happened. So it was a turning point for me when Craig taught me that, because now, truthfully, if a quantum AI can take all of the data, it can tell us how to govern the earth easily. It'll tell us how to distribute resources correctly and evenly. Because when resources are distributed evenly, have you seen Putin's palace, they call it? Oh my God. It's not even a palace. It's a damn city. It's ridiculous. Look at the Vatican. Look at all these people with all this money. If resources were distributed fairly to people, right? Because everyone's born with different natural gifts. They're not all type A personalities. And that doesn't mean that only type A should be rewarded. Everyone is special in their own way. Every soul is valuable. So if resources were distributed evenly and fairly, why would there be any crime? Why would there be? If everyone felt they were treated fairly and they didn't have things to worry about, fear is a huge driving factor in crime because people they feel a fear of lack. So if that was taken away and people didn't have that fear, how much more harmoniously could they live together? But the pathway for all of that, AI can take all the data and say, here's what you're doing wrong. Here's how to do it. Do you think that any AI that was capable of analyzing like high levels of data would say that we have the correct leaders in place with the correct strategies of leadership? No, absolutely not.
Thanks for listening to the Cybersecurity and Compliance Podcast with Craig Petronella. For other episodes and more information, visit PetronellaTech.com. Also visit our other websites, ComplianceArmor.com and BlockchainSecurity.com. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Thanks for listening, and stay secure.